And I want to welcome you to our third webinar in our Bite-Sized Asset Management Sustainability for Water Infrastructure webinar series. We've started this series as we transition our previously annual in-person asset management workshop to an every other year event. So please be on a lookout for a save the date email soon, because we will be holding an in-person workshop in November of this year for the asset management. Other topics we've covered so far in this webinar series include level of service and financial planning, and we do have recordings and slides available if you might have missed those. So if you want a copy, feel free to reach out and we can provide that. Today's topic is going to be emergency planning and response for water, wastewater, and stormwater systems. And we do have a few different speakers here from New Hampshire DES, as well as some guests, and we have a packed agenda. I'm going to turn it over to Andrea to offer some housekeeping details.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Emergency Planning and Response webinar. I'm Andrea Betlick, and I'm the Watershed Specialist in the Non-Point Source Management Program in the Watershed Assistance section of the Watershed Management Bureau. I provide technical assistance to project managers and grantees receiving funding through Section 604B and Section 319 of the Clean Water Act to address stormwater impacts to watersheds throughout the state. I'll be providing technical assistance throughout the webinar today. We do have some housekeeping items to go over before we start. If everyone could just remain muted during the presentations, there will be time at the end of the presentations for questions. There'll be a little Q&A session. So if you have any questions that you want to put in the chat, you can throughout the sessions. We'll just go over those all at the end. And you will have a chance to raise your hand and ask those questions at the end. It will be recorded this session, and it will be put on the asset management webpage. For anyone that wants drinking water and wastewater technical credit hours, you'll receive a certificate in the via email after the webinar. And I will be putting any pertinent links, including contact information and web pages mentioned throughout the webinar in the chat throughout the webinar. So I'm going to pass that back over to Sarah. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. And for those that don't know me, I am Sarah Ridyard, and I'm the Sustainability Engineer for the Wastewater Engineering Bureau. I manage the grant program for asset management projects covering clean water, which includes wastewater and stormwater, with a lot of support from Deb Loisel on stormwater. I also manage and support wastewater planning projects that are funded by New Hampshire DES through the Clean Water State Revolving Fund program. I'm always happy to help if you have questions about applying to our funding programs or about any currently funded projects. You can find my contact info on this slide. And I'm very glad to be here to welcome you to our webinar on emergency planning and response. Thank you for joining us today. We have some great speakers to cover our topic. And as a reminder, we will hold the questions until the end of the webinar, so after all speakers are done. If you do have questions throughout, please feel free to type them in the chat as they come up, and we'll address them at the end. This is just a brief overview of the topics that we're going to cover. I am first going to, in true emergency planning and response fashion, we do have some urgent information to share with you, and we also are lucky enough to have two speakers here today who can answer some questions at the end about this also, but we have a cybersecurity bulletin. I think we're going to have from Alyssa Rosenzweig, who's the Deputy Director from the Overwatch Foundation, who partners with New Hampshire DES on cybersecurity for water and wastewater infrastructure. And we also have Rick Rossi here. So he is available as well. He is our CISA representative for the state of New Hampshire and is able to support systems on cybersecurity for water and wastewater. And I'm just going to get Alyssa's slides up and then turn it over to her to share some information with us.
Good morning, everyone. We are very excited the opportunity on behalf of the Overwatch Foundation with support of DES and CISA to give you breaking news, if you will. A huge part of protecting our critical infrastructure is preventing emergencies, let alone us collectively responding to known threats happening in our critical infrastructure. So we have identified, if you want to go to the next slide, Sarah, that there is an active supply chain breach happening in New Hampshire with respect to these PLC, these programmable logic controllers. In the slide, you'll see what you may be more familiar with is like the full setup on the right of what these PLCs are, but the actual component is an Allen Bradley product that we've identified, which is the pretty widespread platform in New Hampshire. That's on the left. It kind of reminds me of like a Sega Genesis cartridge, if you will. That's kind of a base example of one. But there are quite a few variations. We just wanted to kind of ground it in something visual. So next slide, we wanted to walk you through identifying if one of your items is counterfeit, meaning nobody knows what that device was actually designed to do, whether it is going to do harm to your environment, whether it's going to allow foreign adversaries access to your environment to do Lord knows what. We are still actively trying to get our hands on some of the ones that were identified in New Hampshire to see if they were malicious or just more knockoffs. But part of that effort is spreading the word of the threat and helping make sure folks do this check to identify if they have any counterfeit PLCs in your system. And you may be aware, you may not be aware. Sometimes it's a choice you might make when you've got a budget constraint and you'll be like, I got to get some parts from eBay, or there's a timing constraint, something is actively failing and you can't get something through a valid supply chain, you're still going to want to check if it's any good. And I think one thing that's important to note that your default thing to do if something is real or not would be to reach out to the manufacturer. We've actually found that that isn't even enough to give you full reassurance because there could be a valid serial number that the counterfeiters are just reusing on multiple devices. So it really requires looking more closely at what's going on. And the next couple of slides, we wanted to give you some visuals of what it might look like. And they're subtle. You're, again, looking at that cartridge or the packaging that you might have. This is exclusively right now, to our understanding, in this Rockwell Automation Allen Bradley family. So the address, Rockwell Automation's address, is technically capital S South 2nd Street. So we've seen, not in New Hampshire, but nationally, counterfeit products, or you would have just a small change there. Micrologics is one of their brand names, and it's a capital L that you'd be looking for on your materials. If it's not, it's again very clever. Counterfeiters are trying to make sure you don't know the difference. But that's a sign. If you go to the next slide, assorted other misspellings of Singapore definitely isn't spelled that way. Panel view plus flannel, there's a couple of letters missing in there. Your Ethernet, Etherrent, maybe that's a cool place to live, I don't know. And your power Surly. Again, these are looking for the visual tricks on the labeling that you might not catch if you were just moving quickly. We are fortunate that DES and a bunch of other folks in the cyberspace are ready to support you in a lot of very generous ways. If you have found, willingly or unwillingly, that you have a counterfeit device, please reach out to the email address there. We'll work together to walk through the steps to remove it, identify what's going on, create a plan for replacement. And a lot of the stuff, we're really trying to make it be free if we're able to follow all the steps and collaborate together. Just knowing that financial hurdles are huge when you're trying to run an operation. So Rick, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add. I was just trying to talk quickly here to go over the broad strokes.
I think you hit it really well, Alyssa. I would just add the risks from this are fairly substantial, whether that is an adversary intent on gaining remote access to domestic critical infrastructure, the capability of a network connected programmable logic controller in your environment with malicious intent could enable an adversary remote access into your environment at the process level and able to make configuration changes. As your SCADA is often reporting what your PLC is telling it, that could also mean a malicious actor could potentially change settings and what the readout is to not match what is actually being pushed through the PLC. Major issue there, reliability is one other issue when you're using cheap components at a much lower price point. It's not going to be a quality product. You're much more apt to have this fail quickly. So there are some significant risks here, and we strongly encourage everybody to conduct a proactive review of what you have, ensure your supply chains are tight, and as Alyssa said, if you do encounter a counterfeit PLC, please do notify DES, and we'll do everything we can to help you. Thanks.
Thank you, Rick and Alyssa. That was great. And again, I know I stopped sharing my screen for a second, but I'll put it up out there again. There's that email address. It's also in the chat if you do have a suspected counterfeit device, or if you need a copy of the advisory bulletin that went over the information. And I am going to introduce our next speaker. And if you do have questions on that topic, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll address them again at the end. But just one moment while I get my notes together, and I'm going to introduce Mark Condellis Jr. Is our next speaker. And I believe Mark's going to be sharing from his own screen, so I'll let him get set up while I introduce him. Mark has over 15 years of experience in the wastewater industry, and he is currently a certified grade 4 operator of wastewater in New Hampshire. He has a bachelor's degree in environmental science and policy and 2 associate degrees in civil engineering and environmental engineering. He is also a licensed professional engineer in the state of Delaware. He has worked for municipalities and contract operations companies at 20 different facilities. And he is currently the supervisor of the operations section at New Hampshire DES in the Wastewater Engineering Bureau for wastewater operators. And I will turn it to Mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm also a licensed professional engineer in the state of New Hampshire now as well. So what I wanted to talk with everybody today is emergency response plans, and I will get right into it. So it's always after midnight. Never really is there anything major going on, it seems, during the day. Really, the big things happen at night when you're not expecting it to. This is where it always ends up happening. I swear that's what happens, at least in my experience in the past. It's never convenient. It can happen also on Thanksgiving Day, right when you sit down. I've had that happen in the past as well. I want to give a little bit of a story of a time when I was down in the state of Delaware at a facility. It was Stonewater. I was an operator in responsible charge down in that area, and the manager had gotten a call out for a collection system. Down in Delaware, we were also responsible for the collection systems as well as the treatment plant. The collection system had some type of blockage. It was pretty close to where the lift station was. And if anybody has been to the state of Delaware, it is flat. You're not really dealing with much elevation change. So when you're having some type of blockage and it's close to the lift station, your major concern is okay, whose house is it going to start backing up to? What basement is going to be coming first? The manager who was on call at the time, who got the initial call, he sent out a phone call to myself and other operators, trying to get everybody, all hands on deck. Sent a group of individuals to go get the backup pump for bypassing. Another group went to go get tubing and piping to go from one manhole to the next. Another one went to the treatment facility to see what type of phase we were in, because it was a sequential batch reactor. So we had a bunch of guys going into a ton of different directions. We got the pump there, and we started working on it, and went to kick it on, and the pump didn't work. We had tested the pump recently. Within that month, we had followed the proper maintenance, and it just would not kick on, no matter how many times we had looked to it. So thankfully, the manager at the time had called up the local pump and haul company to bring in a vac truck. And right when we had finally realized that it was not going to kick on, here comes that vac truck. So the vac truck threw in, and we were like, okay, this is great, wonderful. And the pump didn't kick on for the vac truck. Vac truck didn't decide to kick on either. So we're all sitting around, we're just like, okay, our plan A failed. Plan B is now not working either. Thankfully, though, right when we had tried, the pump truck had tried to really work that out. The manager, having some thought on its location of how close to the lift station, he had called up a company all the way up in Pennsylvania to drive down an 18-wheeler, and that had started showing up right around when we had given up on that vac truck as well. So we had Plan A, Plan B. Thankfully, Plan C finally worked out, but it was definitely a stressful evening. So that's that's an interesting story about setting up a bunch of different plans, and you have to have contingencies because it's something isn't going to work right, and so you always need to know what that next step is. And that manager at the time had the forethought to just call everybody, get everybody coming in because of how close it was to that lift station. So we had sat down afterwards to do our after incident reports and 5-day letters and all that, and we wanted to talk about pros and cons. Pros to that incident, we knew what to do. We knew to grab the pump and where it was located and everything like that. And hey, that pump was where it was supposed to be at. And the other thing is that equipment, it was where it was supposed to be at, and we knew where it was all located. So everybody was going to where they should have. The cons was we didn't expect to gather up that equipment would require the manpower that it did. That was an interesting piece. Having so many groups of people, everybody had come in to run to all of these different treatment facilities because this was a contract ops company down there. We realized that it was a waste of manpower. We could have consolidated with the location of the equipment. Another important piece was we did not expect that a situation was going to arise that we would be so close to the lift station. When you're normally talking about emergency responses, it's kind of a broad, well, what would we do if there was a backup in the collection system? That's, at least in my experience, where the conversation goes, oh, well, I would go get this backup pump, or I would have this piece of equipment. But really noting where your critical locations are within collection systems, within the treatment plants, where there's going to be not a lot of time, is extremely important. And as I said, thankfully that manager had the forethought to call up all of these different companies just in the off chance. He would rather have paid the bill for the vehicles to show up and nothing to need to be done than to deal with the environmental impact of backing up into people's houses, or the public impact, that is. And this manager, he was a very interesting individual. He would constantly run practice runs, and one of the great parts about working for this individual was, it's one thing to sit down at the table and have a conversation about your emergency response plans. You can generate ideas, you can talk about how your treatment facility, lost power, the generator, kicked on, but for some reason the PLC decided to fail and you have to run a treatment plant in hand, whether that's water or wastewater. But it's another thing to actually do it. And this manager was known to go to your treatment facility. You would have no idea and just tell you to shut everything off, turn it all off on auto, and run the plant in hand. And we would actually create situations and physically do it. It wasn't just a method of running it through a conversation. We physically had to run a plant in hand for a couple hours. And this was to, one, reinforce that we're reviewing our ERP plans. Two, it was to help us decide what in the ERP plans, the emergency response plans, need to be changed. And really, it was, you don't get to run into those type of situations all that often. And so it's nerve wracking. And what better way than to do it in a controlled environment than in the middle of the night at midnight when everything decides not to work. I I really appreciated learning that bit of information from that manager. You know, when we're looking at this, you've got you're timed, you're walking in blind, you're unaware of what's going on, and you need to discuss the hurdles that you're experiencing during these emergency responses. you know, there are several ways to solve a problem. And one of the ways when you're finding those hurdles, those rough spots in your ERP plans is you can, solve it with a different type of equipment, maybe new types of harnesses if you're doing confined space entry, or maybe there's a better pump that won't fail on you in the middle of the night. Maybe the pump that you had was too old, and in an emergency situation you need to have a newer pump to be more that you can rely on. Um, there's another way method of engineering out problems. Is it something that can just be gotten rid of altogether? If this is a sticking point and it's calling out in the middle of the night, maybe you should just remove the problem altogether, engineer it out. Additionally, is there something you can do for PMs, your maintenance program? Is it maybe greasing a fitting? Or I had a treatment facility where there was a pump that would clog. It seemed like every Saturday it seemed to clog, and we would pull the pump on a weekly basis to pull the rags out of it, but it just was not enough. So we got into the habit of pulling it every Monday and Friday, and that seemed to solve the problem. So, that's another maybe the frequency in which you're looking at your equipment needs to go up. Or is it some outside influence and there's really nothing you can do about it? And this is the world you live in. Is it a break in the middle of the night for a water main? If you can't engineer it out or come up with a new piece of equipment, is there a way to solve the problem within your plan? Maybe there's that sticking point. Like, as I said, at that stormwater facility, we were running around all over the place. Operators were going to different facilities to pull different parts. When we had sat down, we decided that having a mobile response trailer with all of the equipment on it stationed at one site, so one man could go there with his vehicle and pick up all of the equipment and meet everybody else on site. That saved so much time. So we decided to buy a new piece of equipment, and then that became the new part of our ERP. Um, there's always different ways and different methods to solve the problem, and you need to really sit down and think about this. And that kind of brings us into our next piece of O&M manuals, operations and maintenance manuals, standard operating procedures, SOPs, and ERPs, emergency response plans. In the operations section, we go out to a lot of different facilities within all the facilities within New Hampshire to look at how the plants are being operated. And one of the big things that I have found and my colleagues is that operations and maintenance manuals, which is really the backbone of a treatment facility, aren't up to date. Either there's been new equipment or there are new set points for startup. They're outdated. They haven't been opened since the facility was constructed, 20 plus years ago. And, this O&M manuals are really the floor, the foundation in which you're building your standard operating procedures. And then after your standard operating procedures, you're building your ERPs off of. And same can be said for SOPs. They're not at a lot of facilities. And so one of my major recommendations to everybody is that you need to get working on your emergency response plans because it's better than dealing with a new issue in the middle of the night. But you really need to look back to that foundation, your operations and maintenance manuals, and then your SOPs, and work from the bottom up. It is critical pieces of information like this that all new trainees should be trained on. This is, it is great to send a new operator out with the seasoned employee, but really another piece of their education at a treatment plant should be reviewing O&M manuals, standard operating procedures, and ERPs. But these new operators are also a benefit in and of itself. SOPs, O&M manuals, ERPs, they should be written in a way that somebody who has not had to deal with this situation before will understand it. They have a base knowledge, they have a base understanding, but running through that, giving them the SOP or giving them the emergency response plan and seeing if anyone can run through that with of course, understanding the pieces of equipment at a treatment plant, that base level of knowledge, it's an important tool. So I would definitely recommend having SOPs and ERPs, handing them to your new employees and seeing if they understand. Because nothing is worse than waking up at midnight and finding a new issue. And yeah, you have an emergency response plan for it, but there's gaps, there's missing bits of information, and you're in a stressful environment, you're lacking sleep, and having those missing pieces creates a stumbling block. So having the new guy run through it is definitely an important part. So how do you update your plans as a group? I know I've had a lot of operators who felt like some of the working through this process is just moving papers around and writing it down, and or they've been doing it for so long, and it's second nature at that point. So why should they write it down? That industry knowledge, as individuals retire, it leaves, and so having it written down is extremely important. You can talk to the individuals that have been there for the longest and explain that passing on that level of knowledge to the next generation is extremely important. We don't want to lose it. Some situations only come once and a blue moon, and you never want them to ever happen again. So, you having it written down, because it might only happen once, is an important job. So one of the ways you can go about this is you can have a conversation around the water cooler in the morning meetings. I know a lot of facilities where you have a group of operators, they sit down, they have a cup of coffee, have a conversation about what is going on at the treatment plant, what sampling is being done that week, going through that week's work, either pre or post or both. And picking a small portion, one ERP, one SOP, one piece to the puzzle, and just going over it as a group, it makes it a more manageable chunk instead of you have all of these ERPs because you haven't had one yet, and you need to create all of the documents. Doing it one at a time is, I know it sounds simple, but just one at a time really does help. And having everybody involved is important as well. There are so many different backgrounds and knowledge and situations that have arisen at other facilities, and pulling on that wealth of information. Um, don't miss out on it. It doesn't take long to go over a topic or plan, especially if you cut it down to smaller sizes. And another good part, as I explained with that stormwater situation, immediately after that facility down in Delaware, we sat down that next morning, and while writing out the 5-day letter, because there was a discharge, we sat down and went through the ERP, the plan. When were we on site? What were we doing? And the benefits and ways to make it faster. It's better to do it when it's fresh in your head, in your mind, and it makes it less jarring. And everybody is really pumped to want to try to make the next time this happens a streamlined event. And another way to handle going through ERPs is to, in essence, dole them out. Give other individuals in your treatment plants, hand one, please have an ERP for when the facility, ask them to generate one, and discuss them as a group. Obviously, don't just have one person write them. You want everybody's input, but giving one person um, that ability to take ownership of a document, and you really end up, I have found you get a wealth of information from it, and better participation from the group as a whole. These documents are important, all of them, from O&M manuals to SOPs to ERPs, and you don't want to be stuck there in the middle of the night wondering what to do or who to call, and running into a violation or endangerment of public health in the environment. Sarah, I think I am done
Thank
at
you,
this
Mark.
point.
Yeah, great. No, that was really good. And I would add, not only does it happen after midnight, I think Friday afternoons is a time for emergencies
That
also,
is a
when
good one
everybody's
too.
ready to get out, especially if a holiday weekend is coming up. So
Or Christmas morning.
yeah. So that was great. Thank you, Mark. If people have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We are going to keep moving through our agenda. We have our next speaker is Brenda Leonard from the Drinking Water Groundwater Bureau. She's been working at New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services for 4 years and currently manages the cybersecurity and emergency planning program in the Drinking Water and Groundwater Bureau. Previously, she worked in the MTBE Remediation Bureau and other various state agencies. Brenda has a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science and experience as a hazardous waste coordinator and as UST A&B operator. And I will turn it to Brenda.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. Can everybody hear me all right? Is that good, Sarah?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, thank you. So I will be talking on emergency response plans this morning, as we all are. And I will be cutting off my camera for now and turning it back on if there's any questions at the end. Next slide, Sarah. Okay, so New Hampshire faces many weather-related challenges every year, from droughts to flooding, water contamination that could be man-made or even an algae bloom. But what is your water system going to do if you experience one of those events? Do you have an updated emergency response plan? Next slide. So AWIA is America's Water Infrastructure Act of 2018, and it was signed into law October 23rd of 2018. And the purpose of this law is to make sure that community water systems are prepared for emergencies that may happen. It does require water systems serving more than 3,300 people to assess their risks and vulnerabilities to natural disasters, hazards, any malevolent acts. And along with an assessment, you are also required to develop or update your system's existing emergency response plans based on those risks. The goal is to protect public health and to continue offering reliable drinking water. It also ensures that utilities can prevent and respond to any disruptive events and to help them recover from those. And it does take emergency planning from a best practice to an expectation. Next slide. And this is the chart of the upcoming deadlines for risk and resilience assessments, EPA's emergency response plan, as well as DES's emergency response plans. As you can see, ours is coming up next month, March 31st. That's when water systems of all sizes are required to submit one to DES. As you can see, that the EPA does not require systems that are under 3,300 to submit one. That's the only difference between us and them. But just make sure if your system hasn't already submitted one that you keep an eye on your deadlines. Next slide. Thank you. So last year, in 2025, monthly informational bulletins were sent out, and they did include an emergency response plan deadline countdown, as well as other information like cybersecurity and notification procedures, anything really that was going to be covered under the emergency response plans, just to give you some more useful information on that subject. And we were also reminding them of the deadlines that were coming up through the EPA and through us, DES, excuse me. Wow. So according to the new rules, your plan should be updated annually. And it is, as Mark said, also very beneficial to practice at least every year to do those, just so you know if something comes up, you'll know how to handle them. I'm going to be looking at about 700 of these plans in the next by the deadline and a little bit after. So you don't have to wait. If you already have an updated plan, don't wait until the deadline to send it in. You can send it in. And then if there's anything missing or if I have any questions, I'll reach out to you and let you know. But send them in as soon as possible. Next slide. Okay, so until recently, plans were required to be submitted every 6 years. However, in June of last year, 2025, DES adopted new rules that better aligned with the deadlines for EPA requirements, just making it easier for water systems to keep track of those deadlines. It is important to know that cybersecurity is part of those new rules now, and there are specific requirements that must be addressed in your plan. Those can be found online for future reference, but I'll go over those as well in this presentation. If you already have a plan, you do not need to send in a new one. You don't have to start all over. Just make sure your other one is up to date. Also, like we said, practice them often and make sure to keep them in arm's reach. That's so, you know, you're not locking it in somebody's office. So if something happens on the weekend, nobody has access to it. Make sure everybody has access. The owner does, any operators, and also keep it located in the main buildings that all the stuff, all the tech stuff is located. Next slide. So these are the sections that can be found on our template. They all need to be addressed. Now, if there's something on here that your system doesn't have, such as alternate power, like a generator or something, just make sure that you do address that in there. Say, we don't have any other alternate power, or we don't have another water source that we can hook up to, anything like that. Just make sure every section is addressed. Like I said, cybersecurity, that does need to be addressed. If you don't have anything that needs cyber, put that in there. And then explain why you'd feel like you don't need cybersecurity. Do you have Wi-Fi? Do you, if you do have SCADA or anything like that, then obviously you would have some cybersecurity measures that you should be addressing. So just make sure that all those are touched on. Next slide. Okay, so these are the new cyber requirements that can be found online. As you can see, the rules are 503.24. If you can hit on every, not if you can, please hit on every single one of these lines. It just makes it more, makes you understand more about what you may be facing when it comes to cyber. Are you able to work manually if your system's cut out? Do you have an IT specialist that you would contact? What is their plan going to be? Can you just unplug the system for anything that's been contaminated? You know, stuff like that. Those are all questions that need to be addressed. How are you going to document if something happens and when the system went down and who was the person that found them, the incident to be occurring? Stuff like that. So that's important to always touch on your plans. I have seen a few that just names the IT specialist, but we're going to need more information on that as well. I have reached out to those systems, so hopefully everything gets updated for that. Next slide. Some key points for the plan, as I said numerous times, make sure every section is addressed. It's always better to have more information than not enough. If I look at it as this way, if you look at your plan as a new employee, if somebody was coming in and something happened when they were on shift, but nobody else was there, would they know everything to do? Would they know who to contact? What are they allowed to do? Are they allowed to unplug anything if it's a cyber incident? What should they shut off? Look at it through their eyes and make sure it's all filled out that way. As I said, don't lock away the plan. Make sure it's accessible. Another important key point to plans is to address the critical user section. We need to know, and your system needs to know, if it has any hospitals, schools, daycares. On here, like it says, the fire department, the police department. Do you supply water to anybody that needs it? If you're a smaller system, like say a mobile home park, do you have any customers that rely on that water? And if you do, obviously you don't have to put their names or anything, but make sure you say, yes, I have, I don't know, 3 customers that rely on the water. This is how we're going to tell them, and this is what we're going to do. We're going to supply them with bottled water or something like that. Make sure that's all addressed, and make sure to sign, print, and date your emergency plan after it's all been updated and reviewed by your the owner and primary operator. Next slide, perfect. And these are some examples of what I was telling you about how to put in your information. If it says, like under the bottom where it says new source and reactivation, it says we don't have any plans to develop. You can just put that in, that's perfect. Just make sure you put as much information as you can and where you can find them, where your plans are, your as-built plans. Are you a member of mutual aid? Do you have a contract with any other systems? All of that should be attached to your plan. Okay, next slide. Last year, we also updated notification cards. So the yellow cards you can see, that has hours of operation, numbers that you can contact, who you should be contacting for certain things. The blue one is for cyber, and it shows what you can be doing now to prevent a cyber incident. There's some tips there. Obviously, when in doubt, report it, don't wait. So that information's on there, who you should be contacting during, if you believe that there's an incident taking place. At the bottom, you'll see more contact numbers. Primex, if you're a customer Primex, we did work with them and CISA as well to put together the sheet, the third sheet there, the incident response reference. We do have a fillable form of this, but just keep in mind that if you keep it on your computer and your computer system goes down, you're not going to be able to access it. So we recommend that if you want to use this, that you complete it all, print it, and hang it near your computer. So if an incident was supposed to, what did happen, then you would know what to do. If you want any of these and you haven't received those in the bulletins from last year, feel free to reach out to me and I can send anything to you. They are made to just be printed and hung up. And so that's why they have the bright colors, so they're easily seen. Next slide. So this is a note on the cyber assessments for sanitary surveys. Assessments are required as part of your survey now. An assessment must be performed every 3 years, and we do offer, so CISA, Overwatch, and the EPA all offer free assessments. The EPA's assessments is not a boots on the ground. It's more online, so they don't really come and take a look. CISA and Overwatch do come out and they will look through your system for you. If you have any questions on that or you're interested in that, feel free to reach out to me and I can put you in contact with them. I do know that Rick from CISA does assessments, but his schedule fills up very fast. So if you're interested in that, reach out to me and I can work with him on that. If you feel that you do not have any cyber issues, like I said earlier, you don't have SCADA, you don't have internet, that's no excuse not to have an assessment. It is always better to double check just to make sure. A lot of the times they go out and they say, oh, well, you have this, you are hooked up to Wi-Fi or something like that. Then people, that's how you know. So double check, get an assessment done. It is free, and that is going to be due every 3 years. Next slide. Okay, so for emergency response plans and asset management, how they are linked. So this is going to be a few slides on this topic. It is better to have a before record before the disaster type thing, like on a blue sky day. Take the pictures, keep all the receipts of anything that you've been working on beforehand. This is all going to help you when it comes to FEMA reimbursements. The more documentation you have, the better. There is a new, the asset management handbook. I don't know if you have that, but it has been recently updated to include IT as well. That can be found online and it's a great resource, but it matters. It matters because, especially with cybersecurity, that it's a part of your asset management. It's different than your physical infrastructure that you currently have, but like SCADA, PLCs, networks, anything like that, they are an asset as well. And they are vulnerable to cyber attacks. So you need to know how to protect everything because it is going to be costly down the road if something happens. How are you going to replace it? If there is a cyber attack, how are you going to fix that? Are you going to have to buy new computers, new software, stuff like that? So it's important to keep track of all of that. Next slide. And how they are linked. So asset management plans is a kind of what to do before the emergency, like what matters most when resources are limited. Identifies critical assets, risks and consequences, stuff like that. An emergency response plan is about action during the emergency, like how exactly, here's what we do during what's taking place, like when it happens. So who's going to respond? What steps should they take? Stuff like that. Next slide. Thank you. So many utilities use asset management plan as a practical way to achieve sustainable infrastructure. Strong programs focus on knowing what assets you have, how to operate them and maintain them effectively, and how to plan financially. So with this, it also helps you like with end of life of your equipment. How do you budget for future expenses? And also it provides you with some information for town meeting. If you need any funding requests or you need new equipment, it's a good way to use that as well. Next slide, perfect. So if you do not have the updated template and you need one, this is a QR code. It is safe and you can find the template there. It is a PDF and I've had numerous people asking for the Word version. If you do need that, we are working to put that online. But if for now, you can always email me and I will send you a Word version if that's easier for you. Like I said, you already have a plan. You don't need to redo it, just update what you have, but you can use ours as a guide to make sure every section has been hit on. Now this is my contact information. If you have any questions, feel free to email me or give me a call, whichever is easier, and I will await your calls. If not, I will be awaiting your emergency response plans. So if you have any questions, I'm hanging out and I'll see you guys at the end.
Thanks, Brenda. That was great.
Thank you.
Anybody who needs their contact info is in the chat, and I'm just going to get our next speaker's presentation ready. And bear with me for 1 second while I get those slides up. All right, they should be coming through momentarily if they're not already up there. And our next speaker is going to be Greg Kirchofer from the city of Somersworth. Greg was a member of the U.S. Coast Guard after high school and became a machinery technician, and he pursued plumbing after leaving the service and completed a 4-year plumbing apprenticeship through the state of New Hampshire and the U.S. Department of Labor. He worked in the plumbing industry for 21 years and currently holds a master plumber and gas fitter license in the state of New Hampshire, Maine, and Massachusetts. He began his water treatment career in 2008 and now currently holds a Water Treatment 3 and Distribution 2 license. He is the Chief Water Treatment Plant Operator for the City of Somersworth. And I will turn it to Greg.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning. So we're going to go over an event that occurred here at the City of Somersworth that was unknown what exactly we were dealing with, and it was an interesting situation, to say the least, and it involved with suspected tampering with our storage tank at our Rocky Hill tank. So let's go to the next slide, please. So we'll talk a little bit about our Rocky Hill storage tank. It's a 1 million gallon tank. It's 100 feet tall. It was constructed in 1971, and this tank is actually located on our 16-inch main, which is part of the arterial loop system we have here in the city of Somersworth. The tank we had rehabilitated in 2015. It had some lead paint that still existed. It's a ring tank, so they're built in rings, and they had removed the lead up to the 6th ring. So we elected to do a complete strip and recoat of the tank to remove that lead paint, but as well as we did the interior at the time. And on the tail end of the rehabilitation of the tank, we elected to install a grid beam mixing system, which was started up in 2016. We've done all of our AWWA inspections, which were completed by Underwater Solutions. So prior to this event occurring, we recoated in 2016 or completed the recoat, and then 2020 we had our 5-year inspection. Next slide, please. So we'll go over a little bit of the timeline of events. We received a report of an open hatch by a resident that was walking the dog in the area of our tank. Our tank is located off the beaten path. It's kind of up in the woods. So there tends to be residents that pass through there, which is actually helpful to us because if they see something, they usually will say something to us, which works well. So we had a on-call staff respond to investigate and see, what were we dealing with? What was it, the vault on the ground, or was it a hatch on the tank? Staff verified there was a hatch open on one of our top hatches on the backside of the tank. We elected to isolate the tank from the distribution systems just out of precaution because we don't know what we're dealing with. One of the things I don't have on this timeline, but we did contract with our local high school. They have a drone program there. So their drone pilot came out. This was on a late Friday evening. We had him come in Saturday morning. We did a drone flyover. Nothing out of the ordinary other than the hatch was open. And everything was very visible on the top of it, but there wasn't any more suspected issue. But it was something we wanted to definitely take very seriously and use our emergency response plan to further address the issue. We contacted NHDES for further guidance after on that first thing Monday morning. They had asked us to drain the tank for inspection and then do a bacteria test in the area of where the tank is located on the distribution system. We had also previously bacteria tested roughly 2 days before our system, and so there was no hits on the system, as far as we could tell. And then we did the bacteria test in the general area, and those all came back clean as well. So then we contracted with Thai Sales. They have a division, ATIS, it's their tank division. They did a empty tank inspection and cleaning. So they went in, they cleaned the bottom of the tank, just investigated to make sure that nothing was put into the tank. Did a really thorough job of imaging the interior, the exterior, which also was going to be completed as well to have for our 5-year inspection. And then we refilled the tank. They super chlorinated prior to refilling it. We filled it up to overflow, testing for the chlorine dose. Once we had that achieved and we had water coming out of the overfill, we allowed it to sit. We did a series of samples. We did 5 samples 24 hours after filling. And then we waited another, I think it ended up being like another 2 days because there was a weekend in between. And we did a follow-up 5 bacteria samples. And with each of those series we did, we allowed 15 minutes between each sample. So we just left the hydrant running directly from the tank and completed that every 15 minutes till we got all 5 samples filled. So here's some imagery. The one photo on the right is one of the on-call staff actually took a picture that's looking up at the night sky, and you could see the tank was open on the back side, very visible once you got around to that area. If you're on the front or the sides of the tank, not very visible. So it was good looking out by the resident that saw it. And then to the left was when we decided to, or we were able to get the contractor to come in and open up the 30-inch hatch on the side of the tank so that we could do our inspection. Next slide, please. So when they got up to the top, this is what they saw. The hatch was there. I don't know, I'm not quite clear. There was no lock on it. So somebody definitely was able to somehow climb up. The ladder, just for reference, is about almost 20 feet in the air. So they had to do some crafty work to get up to the top there, which was the puzzling part as to for what reason, was somebody intentionally doing it, or was it just somebody that was, a young kid or something that was messing around with the tank. But this is what they found when they arrived. Next slide. So here's the inside view. as you can see on the left picture, there was roughly about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch of sediment that sat on the bottom. So nothing out of the ordinary there. Didn't find anything in the sludge. And then we also took some pictures to the lid, so you can see the center of that picture on the right is the vent portion of the tank, and then the right would be the open hatch that was there. Next slide, please. Post cleaning, they did a great job. The floor and the walls have a little bit of staining, which is typical unless you actually do some sort of like a pant night cleaning or something excessive, which for the most part, the walls actually were fairly clean. But I just wanted to illustrate the floor looked great when it was done. They did a great job, and we checked basically every inch of that tank inside to make sure that nothing was further tampered with, even as far as looking down the inlet pipe to make sure there was nothing there. And it was determined that more than likely it was just somebody that was fooling around with the tank essentially, and kind of caused the big issue for us. So after the end of the tank inspection, we made sure the tank was secure, locked, and that we have locks on both hatches. This hatch isn't normally used at all because it's on the north side of the tank. The other hatch that we normally do our inspections through when we send a diver in and such is right at the ladder, which is on the south side. And there's also a ladder to get up to the center of the tank. But we wanted to make sure that post inspection that we had this locked and secured. So a little summary of our actions and what we learned through a series of events. Thorough observation. When conducting tank inspections, visually verify that there are no open hatches by viewing the top from all sides. And that's one of the things, we don't know exactly how long this was open for, but it was something that we realized that we really have to be observant of. It's not something that's just going to stand out, because when we went to view where the actual open hatch was, unless you were almost directly under the tank on the back side, it wasn't really visible. Now, if you had imagery from above, you could definitely see it. So that was one of the things we learned, that we really have to keep a close eye on this tank when we're doing inspections. Faster response and notifying DES. DES was notified, obviously, a little bit later than I was supposed to. It was outside of our 24-hour window, so we want to make it, obviously it's faster for us to get more help by notifying them early. So this is one of the things we learned, was to make sure that, one of the first few calls that we make would be to DES to notify them. Conduct weekly inspections. So city policy was updated so that we now do weekly inspections, and develop the checklist so that everything is just basically laid out for whoever the operator is doing the inspection, just to make sure that we're thoroughly checking and really getting a good eye on everything around that parcel. Like I say, it is up in the woods, so it's not something that's regularly visited. And we want to make sure that, if there's any type of thing out of the ordinary, make sure we're picking it up and documenting it and addressing it. And then it was one of the things we also decided too was, do regular training with the staff, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, because somebody might look at something differently, and it's always good to have multiple sets of eyes. So if we can all kind of collaborate together, it helps us to be able to get things addressed and make sure all protocols are followed, in a relatively timely manner. Next slide, please. Some final thoughts on this, and below are some important steps that we found kind of helped us minimize potential impact. Fortunately, there was nothing that came of it, but one of the big things was bacteria testing. That's always paramount. We completed several rounds of bacteria tests to ensure that the public drinking water was safe for our residents. And I spoke earlier that we had already done our regular bacteria testing. We do twice a month, 5 samples in the first 10 days, and then 5 samples in the second. So we had already had some documentation that our system was clear of bacteria. It doesn't necessarily pick up everything, but any type of acute potential, we were confident that we didn't have any bacteria there. We also completed the second round 2 days after to make sure the tank was clear. And communication with NHDES. I do want to thank NHDES for being instrumental and clear direction to navigate throughout the entire event. They were very clear with the timeline as well as testing and inspection expectations to assure public safety at all times. And they reached out to make sure that nobody had been impacted, be it, somebody had gotten sick from what they thought to be a waterborne issue. So they were very good with that. Completing sanitary tank inspections is very critical. We are really strict, I guess, if you want to call it, to making sure that we're, every 5 years we're having that tank inspection on top of our just base inspections. But the tank inspection, normally we would have a diver go in and just do that inspection. However, since we had to drain it, Thai Sales, which we thank them for expediting the inspection. We were on schedule to be done later, probably closer to December timeframe. They were able to advance it very quickly for us. So they were here within less than a week's time to do the inspection. And this helps us get a great snapshot of tank condition and determining if the storage tank has been compromised or tampered with, in that 5-year period. Because 5 years is a long time. I know regulation says 3 to 5 years. We always go with the 5 years. Obviously, if we find something that is indicative of an issue, we could expedite that inspection. Additional tips would be vigilant, ask the public to report any suspicious activities or discoveries of things that might look unusual. Couple of the things I didn't add the final thoughts here. We did also elect to start doing biannual drone inspections. So hopefully someday maybe we'll end up having a contract to do drone inspections monthly, but at least if we do it a couple times a year, that gives us a good idea exactly what's going on top of our tank. Couple other people I'd like to thank as well. Chris Berg with Wright Pierce Engineering was very instrumental in walking us through, what we need to do for chlorination and answering our questions for us. It's really appreciated for all the help that he has given us. Here's my contact information. If anybody has any questions or would like to, get an idea what kind of goes through somebody that has to deal with a kind of a live situation. Hopefully nobody ever has to do it again. But in the case, I'd be glad to, speak with anybody if they have any questions. And thank you very much. And I appreciate the time to talk to everybody today.
Thank you, Greg. We really appreciate hearing from your experience. It's always helpful to others, I think, to share when things happen. And we're lucky that nothing, worse happened with your tank, with that hatch
Absolutely.
open. So thank you very much. We are going to move right along. And I think Corey is going to share his own slides. Great. He's already getting them up. So I will introduce our last speaker today. So thank you, everybody, for being here. And our last speaker is Corey Clark, the Chief Engineer of the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services Water Division's Dam Bureau, and he has been with the Bureau since 2015. He began his career as a dam safety engineer, conducting inspections and permitting for public and private dams. In 2018, Corey was promoted to Chief Engineering and Construction Engineer, where he oversaw major rehabilitation projects on 273 state-owned dams. Since 2023, he has served as the administrator of the Dam Bureau, overseeing all 3 sections of the Dam Bureau while managing dam repair and operations, dam safety regulations, and water resources statewide. Corey holds a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the University of Maine and a master's degree in civil engineering from the University of New Hampshire. Welcome, Corey.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everyone, for having me. This will be a little bit different. While it does touch on wastewater, drinking water, and stormwater, over here at the Dam Bureau, we are in a bit of a different world. So there might be some items that I touch upon that there is overlap and items that are completely separate. And I'll move through this presentation rather quickly, but certainly reach out with any questions that you may have following this. Thank you. So let's get going here. All right. So in New Hampshire, what exactly is a dam? Essentially, a dam is anything that's over 6 feet in height that impounds water or another liquid, or is at the outlet of a great pond. And so as you know, there's lots and lots of structures throughout the state. State owns 275 structures, but there's actually 2,600 registered dams in New Hampshire. Those dams are broken down into various hazard classifications. So you have high hazard dams that if they were to fail, there'd be probable loss of life. Significant hazard dams, if they were to fail, to be large economic consequences, such as a state route, severing a state route. Low hazard dams, low economic consequences, such as a town road loss. And last but not least, non-menace dams are dams such that if they were fail, nobody should know in theory, except for the dam owner themselves. So building upon that a little bit more, we've already touched upon a height of 6 feet or more, or located out of Great Pond, but also artificial barriers which create surface impoundments of liquid industrial or liquid commercial waste, such as septic or sewage, regardless of height or storage capacity, are considered dams. So some of you may have a dam out there that say, wait a second, my lagoon embankment is less than 6 feet in height. Well, according to the state statute, the reason it is registered as a dam is because of this criteria. The other item in here is that stormwater detention basins, which essentially are normally not storing water, if they are over 10 feet in height or have a certain storage capacity of 6 acre feet or greater, are also considered as dams as well. So the Dam Bureau, some of you may have heard of us, run into us at different times, but this is a quick overview of the Bureau. We're actually broken into 3 different sections, and I'll go through each section individually. We have the dam safety inspection section. So those of you out there with lagoons or drinking water reservoirs are probably most familiar with this section. This section is made up of the men and women that actually do all the inspection and permitting for all dams in the state, the 2,600 registered dams that I mentioned earlier. As you can see here, we cover everything from up near Canada all the way down to the Massachusetts border, and really responsible for all the permitting and inspections at all of those structures. Then we move into the operation and maintenance section. So I mentioned earlier, there are 275 state-owned dams. Of those, 207 are actually operated directly by NHDES. And that includes the outlets of the big lakes, Lake Winnipesaukee, Newfound, Squam Lake, Ossipee, and many others all throughout the state. So we do all the operations at those facilities as well. Jumping into the engineering and construction section, those men and women are actually responsible for all state-owned dams all throughout the state. And so that is all the major reconstruction projects on not only those dams that I mentioned previously at the outlet of the big lakes, but a lot of many smaller dams located throughout the state, such as within state parks, fish and game wildlife management areas, and elsewhere all throughout the state. Those men and women actually do the construction projects in-house. You can see here we have our own in-house construction crew. Some of you who travel on 89 probably have seen our new operation facility right off of exit 2 with the mural running across the 8 large garage doors facing I-89. And so the operation and maintenance group works out of that facility along with the engineering and construction section. However, with the ownership of so many dams, there are 64 high hazard dams that are owned by the state. And with those 64 high hazard dams and 34 significant hazard dams, all of those dams are required to have an emergency action plan, which I'll be diving into a little bit more. The photos here are actually of Copps Pond Dam up in Tuftonboro, a high hazard fish and game dam that was reconstructed several years ago. And you can see the emergency action plan, the actual inundation area, outlining different items that would be impacted if that dam was to fail. So emergency action plans, what are those? Well, those are actually defined in statute. There's a written document delineating a prescribed sequence of actions to be taken by a dam owner to inform the authorities and others downstream of an impending or actual sudden release of water. So it's basically a plan that's required to be developed by the dam owner that is actually brings together all the various local entities as well, fire, police, any other local emergency management personnel that may be involved, other dam owners, things of that nature. And basically that plan not only has to be kept on file with the dam owner themselves, but also those local emergency management directors, along with actually state police and others, so that when those plans need to be activated, they can be done so appropriately. So diving into a little bit more, basically those men and women that go around to do all the inspections at all public and privately owned dams, or dam safety and inspection section, they are responsible for overview of all emergency action plans. I mentioned earlier the engineering construction section. So those men and women are responsible for developing the plans, but actually maintaining the plans and making sure the plans are up to date is actually our dam safety and inspection section. So now we're diving into getting out of the statutes, diving into the rules a little bit more. What exactly is the meat and potatoes of an emergency action plan? So one, it's got to clearly define the area which would be inundated if the dam was to fail, and there's certain parameters that you have to fail that dam. And when I mention dam, this is regardless if it's a dam that impounds a lagoon or a drinking water source, or even any recreational body of water throughout the state. So you have to define the area that would be inundated downstream, provide the notification procedures, and the responsibilities of different individuals and agencies during that response. And once again, the owner of the dam has to prepare this emergency action plan. Diving into the rules a little bit more. So if you have a plan on file, you're responsible for actually testing that plan, basically the notification flow chart. And I'll show you one here in a minute, but you have to make sure that the proper people are being contacted when the emergency action plan is activated. So it starts with 911, basically falls down through that tree. And I will add that my number is actually located on all emergency action plans in the state as far as the contact for the Dam Bureau. And then I work to make sure the men and women, primarily in the engineering construction section, or if it's a state-owned dam, the operations section, are being contacted properly. So you have to do that test every 2 years if you have a high hazard dam, or every 4 years if you have a significant hazard dam. And then annually, you actually have to review the EAP and make sure that if there changes are needed, that you actually implement those changes. So this is a very simple notification flow chart that I mentioned prior to, and the actual emergency action plan. Now, this will be available after the fact, but certainly reach out to the Dam Bureau. We actually have a template for the emergency action plan. If you have a dam and you need to develop one of these, along with the template for the notification flow chart, which you can see here as well. So here's a real world example. This is actually a drinking water reservoir, and it actually is impounded by 2 state-owned dams. They're both large earth dams, roughly on the order of about 35 to 40 feet tall, and with one dam being about 300 feet long and the other dam being about 1,200 feet long. And so while it's a drinking water source, the state of New Hampshire actually owns and maintains these 2 dams. And so I'll dive into the emergency action plan that we have for these high hazard sites. So first step, we have the notification flow chart. So the one thing that we have in the Dam Bureau notification flow charts is always starting with 911. So even if there's a member of the public out there walking their dog and they see something happen, they can basically call 911. Hey, I see an issue. That 911 call into dispatch is actually going to move down through state police, and then I am going to get a call directly from that so that we can respond accordingly. It will also activate the other various entities, such as the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office, the Greenville Fire Department, Greenville Police Department, Milford Area Communications Center to actually contact Wilton as well, and Southwest Fire Mutual Aid to contact Temple, because you have multiple communities actually involved when you actually activate these emergency action plans, because downstream of these dams, the flow actually moves through multiple communities. So you can see here, here's actually a zoomed out portion of the inundation map. You can see here on the left, we have the 2 dams, one outflow being indicated in one color, the other outflow being indicated in another color, because basically if those dams were to fail, the water would enter 2 different stream systems or river systems and basically converge down in Wilton and eventually move down through the downtown area of Wilton and down through Milford from there. And so what do you actually have to look for when you have these emergency action plans? Well, zooming in on the town of Wilton, you can see here, there's notes here that call out the velocity of the water, the duration that the water is going to be overtopping in particular locations. So a couple of things that always come up is, what is the response time? How much time do we have from when the dam actually fails until this road or this piece of infrastructure is going to be inundated. So you see here, these examples, we have depth of low point of Greenville Road, 2.2 feet of water, time to rise, 1.6 hours, and the time to peak, 2.7. So you have about 1.5 hours before that road is starting to be impacted, and it's going to be impacted for a couple more hours after that occurs. So you can see here, these are all the homes within that inundation area, all those black dots that will have to be evacuated. And that is basically an exercise that gets done by the local response officials who pull that EAP off their shelf to dive into it, along with the dam owner as well. And the other thing actually that all of these EAPs point out is when does the critical inundation area end? And so here at the state of New Hampshire is basically 1 foot of change. So if the flow from the dam failure is 1 foot or less, that's where the EAP kind of ends. And so, but up until that point, you got to be on your toes as far as making sure that you're paying attention to who needs to be evacuated downstream and where exactly those floodwaters are going to go. So jumping into wastewater lagoons and EAPs, one thing I did want to point out here is that prior to 2024, and this probably impacted some people on the call, is that if you had say a lagoon that stored sewage or septage, and it had a storage capacity of 2 acre-feet or more, that was classified as a significant hazard structure, regardless of what the downstream impacts were. So even if there were no impacts downstream, if you met this criteria, you had a significant hazard structure. That rule was actually changed in 2024 to remove that out. And so now it's solely based on impacts. So once again, regardless of your height or storage capacity, if during a failure of that lagoon impacts downstream either homes or businesses or roadways, that is what your hazard classification is based on. No longer is it based on solely the contents of the lagoon. So here's a couple of examples of some EAP inundation maps. The difference here is that because lagoons have a relatively low volume, you don't see that long inundation map. It's what we call a simplified inundation map. Usually it's just 1 page showing these are the lagoons, these are the buildings or areas affected if a lagoon was going to fail. So you see here on the left screen, this is one that was done with some new modeling software, looking actually 2D flow if the lagoons breach. And you can see here basically an outline of the hazard area, which is really in the immediate vicinity of the lagoon, but you do have buildings that could be occupied by either employees of other town departments or the public themselves that could be impacted if those lagoons were to fail. So those are the buildings that would have to be evacuated. On the right here is actually an older map, but it's still a useful map in which there's a whole row of homes that are actually just downstream of the lagoon. So once again, not a large inundation area, but nonetheless, homes that would have to be evacuated if there was an issue going on at the lagoons. Finally, we jump into stormwater detention basins. Like I mentioned earlier in the presentation, unless the dam or the stormwater basin, the embankment itself is over 10 feet in height or has a storage capacity of 6 acre-feet or greater, chances are it's not an actual dam. And so in 2006, the state statute was actually changed. So prior to then, you may have had, hey, I've got stormwater detention basins all throughout my community. They're on the order of 5-7 feet tall. Well, actually, after 2006, the statute was changed to redefine what a dam is. And at that time, a lot of those stormwater detention basins became exempt. Here's an example of a DOT stormwater detention basin that actually does qualify as a dam. The height of the embankment is over 10 feet in height, and I'll show you here in a second how that is measured exactly. But this qualifies as a dam in the state of New Hampshire. So when we get plans from developers or highway entities in which, hey, I got to put in a stormwater detention basin, we look at how high is the man-made portion of that embankment. Not solely how tall is the embankment, but really what it boils down to is how much of that is man-made engineered fill. So that is how that 10 feet is measured. So in this case, you can see the embankment itself is likely less than 10 feet tall. But if you look at how far the bottom excavation is to the top of that embankment is greater than 10 feet, that's what creates it as a jurisdictional dam. Fortunately, here in New Hampshire, while we do have many non-menace and some low hazard stormwater detention basins, we do not have any significant or high hazard detention basins. Therefore, there are no emergency action plans associated with stormwater detention basins in New Hampshire. However, if you have a low significant or high hazard dam, such as a stormwater basin that has that is a low hazard structure, you still are required under the state dam safety rules to develop a operation maintenance and response plan or form. That is, once again, another template that we have on our website, but basically this provides the location of the dam, the owner of the dam, the height, and really kind of a simplified emergency action plan, essentially. Who's going to be contacted, what needs to be done during an incident, and how is that incident, what's the response to that incident? Now, a lot of the information in this might be same as the information in an EAP. However, this cannot take the place of an emergency action plan. So if you have a significant or high hazard structure, you still have to have an emergency action plan in place along with this OMR form as well. So that way we can be in the know as to who to contact when an issue actually arises. And a lot of times these are actually more valuable during those times in which, hey, there's high water out here. There's no need to activate the emergency action plan, but we want to make sure that whoever is responsible for the site is taking active measures or just being aware that, you know, water is getting high in this general vicinity within the state. And so these are where these OMRs come into play. And really with that, that's all I had. Just a quick overview of emergency action plans here in the state of New Hampshire, how they impact particularly wastewater and drinking water facilities, and then stormwater detention basins. And certainly reach out anytime if you have any questions. You can find all those different forms on our website as well. And thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Corey. That was great. I like how you tied it all into all of our water, wastewater, and stormwater, facilities that we have throughout the state. Are going to take questions for all of our speakers at this time. So I invite any of the speakers, if you want to turn your camera on. I did not see any questions yet in the chat, but you can type a question in the chat, or there is the ability for attendees to raise your hand. We will unmute you, and then you have to unmute yourself. So if you have a question, please go ahead and raise your hand, type it in the chat. Any of our speakers are happy to answer any questions that people have. I'm not seeing any yet, but I do want to thank all of our speakers because I think that was a really great overview. We had a lot of different perspectives on emergency planning and the response, which is really helpful. So thank you, everybody, for participating today. And I see Jonna has her hand raised. I think you can unmute yourself, right, Jonna?
Yep. Yeah, I just thought I would add, I know Rick's after Greg's presentation in Somersworth, I'm just going to put in the chat. So we have Joe Villers is our CISA physical security advisor, and Joe Villers do physical assessments at your utility. So I just thought that might be a helpful resource for those that would like it. So I'll put his name in the chat.
Great. So, Jonna, you were cutting in and out for me a little bit. I don't know if for others had the same problem, but it was she's putting Joe Viller's contact info, who does physical security assessments. In addition to, we have Rick's support for the cybersecurity assessments. Any other questions or comments, or anybody want to tell your own emergency response story? We're always open for those. That Friday afternoon before the holiday weekend where you got the call that you didn't want to get called. I think this topic is great, and we had, such a great group that presented on it. We covered a lot of different things. So thank you, everybody. And I see Jonna put that contact info in the chat. So think about reaching out for some of those assessments if you are interested. There's also lots of other resources. Andrea was great at keeping up with the all the different things we were throwing at you today. So if you check the chat, you'll find links to all those different templates that we discussed and the different documents that might be helpful, as well as contact information for our speakers. And we do thank you for participating today. I think this was a really great session, and I know this topic is of interest to a lot of people. So feel free to reach out if you have other topics that you are interested in hearing about during this series. We're always taking feedback. And again, I appreciate the time for everybody attending as well as our speakers. So thank you.